What if I told you that the very first signs of a stroke can look so ordinary, like a smile, a sip of coffee, or a simple word, that most seniors don't even realize what's happening until it's too late? That's the frightening truth. For many older adults, strokes don't begin with dramatic collapses or sudden unconsciousness. They begin quietly, with small, almost invisible changes. A weak grip, a slurred word, a moment of confusion that seems like forgetfulness. And in those small moments, the clock has already started ticking. Take Walter, a 74-year-old grandfather from Ohio. One morning, while reading his newspaper, his wife noticed something subtle. His smile seemed uneven. When she asked if he wanted more coffee, his words came out jumbled, almost nonsensical. Moments later, he dropped his cup because his hand suddenly felt weak. Within minutes, Walter was in the ER. He had been showing the earliest signs of a stroke, but neither of them realized it until it was almost too late. And here's the part most seniors don't know. Strokes are not rare events that happen to someone else. In fact, according to the National Institute on Aging, nearly 1 in 4 adults over 70 will experience a stroke in their lifetime. What's more concerning is that up to 80% of strokes could be prevented if the warning signs were recognized and acted on quickly. Think about that. The majority of strokes are not inevitable. They're missed opportunities for prevention. Yet surveys show that almost half of older adults in the U.S. cannot name even 2 warning signs of stroke. That lack of awareness costs precious time. And with every passing minute, brain cells are being lost. Millions of them. But here's the hope. Recognizing the signals early can change everything. Quick action can mean the difference between walking out of the hospital and never walking again, between returning to your life or losing your independence forever. That's why in this video, we'll go through the 13 early signs of stroke in seniors over 70, from the obvious red flags to the surprising, little-known symptoms that often slip under the radar. I'll also share the simple FAST method, the one tool every senior and family member must know when stroke strikes. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Have you or someone close to you ever experienced sudden dizziness, blurred vision, or speech problems that you thought were just aging? If yes, type 1 in the comments. If you'd like to learn practical ways to prevent stroke naturally, type Z. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what you learned today could save your life tomorrow. As we move into the very first warning sign, let's go back to Walter's story from the introduction. Remember how his wife noticed that something didn't look quite right with his smile? That's not just a coincidence. It's one of the earliest and most important signals your body can send. A stroke often begins in the face. The muscles on one side suddenly weaken, causing what doctors call facial drooping. But you don't need medical training to notice it. You just need to look closely. Imagine you're chatting with your spouse or grandchild, and you smile at something funny. Normally, both sides of your face lift evenly. But with a stroke, one corner of the mouth stays flat or droops downward. Sometimes the eye on that side looks half closed, almost like it's tired. To the person experiencing it, it might feel like heaviness in the cheek or difficulty controlling saliva. This isn't about vanity, it's about survival. Why does this happen? When a stroke blocks blood flow to the brain, the nerves that control facial muscles stop receiving proper signals. It's like a light switch suddenly turning off. The face becomes uneven because the brain is no longer able to command both sides equally. A simple at-home test. Doctors often use a quick check. Ask the person to smile. If the smile looks lopsided or uneven, treat it as a red flag. Don't wait to see if it improves. Don't assume it's just fatigue or old age. Scientific insight. According to the American Stroke Association, facial drooping is one of the most common early stroke symptoms, present in nearly 70% of cases. And here's the key. The sooner it's recognized, the greater the chance of recovery. Patients who reach the hospital within the golden window of 3 hours are far more likely to walk out without lasting disability. Why seniors? Over 70 must pay extra attention. At this age, it's easy to dismiss small changes. A crooked smile might be brushed off as dentures not fitting right or just tired muscles. But ignoring it could cost precious minutes, minutes that make the difference between full recovery and permanent paralysis. A real-life reminder. Walter's wife trusted her instincts. She didn't wait. She called 911 immediately, and because of that, he received treatment in time. Today, he can still laugh with his grandchildren, though his story could have ended very differently. So here's your takeaway. Never ignore a crooked smile. If you or someone you love suddenly shows facial drooping, even for a few minutes, is not just aging. It's a cry for help from the brain, and it means you need to act fast. We just learned that a crooked smile can be one of the very first warnings of a stroke. But sometimes the face looks fine, and the clue comes out in the words. Let me tell you about Helen, a 72-year-old grandmother from Florida. She was on the phone with her daughter one morning, chatting about the grandkids. Suddenly, her daughter noticed something odd. Helen's words began to sound garbled, as if her tongue were too heavy. She tried to say, "I'm fine," but it came out jumbled, almost like she was speaking a different language. Within minutes, Helen couldn't form full sentences at all. Her daughter recognized the danger and called 911. Doctors later confirmed it was a stroke. Why speech problems happen? When a stroke cuts off blood flow to the brain, it often affects areas responsible for language, like the Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Without oxygen, these regions struggle to function, and the result is slurred, slow, or confused speech. There are usually two main patterns: slurred speech, dysarthria. The words sound thick or mumbled, as though the person is drunk or overly tired. Word confusion, aphasia. The person can't find the right words, says the wrong ones, or can't understand what's being said to them. Scientific insight. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, speech difficulty is present in more than 60% of strokes. What makes it especially dangerous is that it often goes ignored. Families might think, "Grandma's just tired," or "maybe he's dehydrated." But every minute lost increases the damage. How to check quickly. A simple at-home test is to ask the person to repeat a common phrase like, "The sky is blue," or "I am feeling okay." If the word come out slurred, incomplete, or nonsensical, treat it as an emergency. Why seniors? Over 70 are especially at risk. It's normal for memory and speech to slow down with age. But don't confuse gradual forgetfulness with sudden speech trouble. The key difference is that stroke symptoms come suddenly, in seconds or minutes, not over months. A real-life reminder. Helen's daughter didn't wait to see if the speech would improve. Because she acted fast, Helen received clot-busting treatment in the hospital within the critical 3-hour window. Today, she's back to reading stories to her grandkids, her speech nearly restored. We just talked about how speech can suddenly slip away, turning clear words into garbled sounds. But strokes don't always attack our ability to speak. They can also steal our sight in an instant. Take Harold, a 76-year-old retired engineer from Texas. One evening while watching his favorite baseball game, he suddenly realized the screen looked different. The pitcher's figure blurred, and half the scoreboard seemed to disappear. He rubbed his eyes, thinking his glasses were dirty. But when he closed one eye, the problem didn't go away. Moments later, Harold bumped into the coffee table because his depth perception was suddenly off. His wife, alarmed, rushed him to the ER, where doctors confirmed he had suffered a minor stroke affecting the vision centers of his brain. Why vision changes happen. The brain controls vision, not just the eyes. When a stroke cuts off blood supply to the occipital lobe or to the pathways that connect the eyes and brain, it can cause sudden, blurred vision in one or both eyes, double vision, making objects overlap, loss of vision on one side, hemianopia, where half the visual field goes dark. These symptoms are often ignored or mistaken for eye problems, but they're actually brain problems, and they require urgent action. Scientific insight. According to the American Stroke Association, about 20 to 25% of stroke patients experience sudden vision loss or disturbance. What makes it dangerous is how easily it gets brushed off. Seniors often assume, it's just my cataracts, or I need new glasses. But unlike gradual eye changes, stroke-related vision loss happens suddenly, within seconds or minutes. How to check quickly. If someone suddenly says they can't see clearly, try this test. Ask them to cover one eye, then the other. If vision is blurred, doubled, or missing in either case, treat it as a red flag. Do not wait for an eye appointment. Call 911 immediately. Why seniors? Over 70 should be extra alert. Many older adults already have eye conditions like glaucoma or macular degeneration. That makes it easy to dismiss sudden vision changes as just part of getting older. But strokes are abrupt. If vision problems appear suddenly, while reading, watching TV, or walking, it's more than aging. It's a warning from the brain. A real-life reminder. Harold's wife trusted her instincts. Because she didn't wait for an eye doctor visit, he received emergency treatment right away. Today, he still has some minor blind spots, but he can live independently, something that would not have been possible if the stroke had been ignored. We just learned how strokes can suddenly steal your vision, turning a clear world into a blur or even darkness. But sometimes, the very first sign isn't in your eyes. It's in your head, not a slow, dull ache like the ones you've had before. This is different. It's sudden, severe, and unforgettable. Let's talk about Janet, a 72-year-old retired teacher from North Carolina. She was knitting one evening when, out of nowhere, she felt what she later described as the worst headache of my life. The pain came like a bolt of lightning, sharp, crushing, and unlike anything she had ever felt before. She thought maybe it was a migraine, even though she'd never really had migraines before. But minutes later, she became dizzy, her vision blurred, and she started vomiting. Her husband immediately called 911. Doctors later confirmed she had experienced a hemorrhagic stroke caused by a blood vessel bursting in her brain. Why this happens? Not all strokes are caused by clots. Some are caused by bleeding inside the brain. When a fragile artery bursts, this sudden bleed increases pressure inside the skull, irritating nerves and blood vessels. The result? A headache so severe and sudden that it feels like nothing you've ever had before. Doctors sometimes call it a thunderclap headache because it strikes instantly without warning. Scientific insight studies show that up to 25% of hemorrhagic strokes begin with a severe headache as the first symptom. According to the American Academy of Neurology, seniors who report a sudden and extreme headache are far more likely to be experiencing a stroke or brain bleed than a migraine. The difference is in the pattern. Migraines usually build up gradually, while stroke-related headaches are sudden, severe, and often accompanied by other neurological signs like dizziness, nausea, or vision changes. Why seniors? Over 70 must pay attention. At this age, many people dismiss headaches as part of aging, dehydration, or stress. But here's the key difference. If a headache comes on fast, feels overwhelming, or is completely unlike your usual headaches, treat it as an emergency. Don't wait to sleep it off. A real-life reminder. Janet's husband didn't wait. Because he called 911 right away, doctors were able to stop the bleeding before it spread further. She still struggles with some memory lapses, but she's alive and still able to enjoy time with her grandchildren. Without quick action, her story could have ended that night. We just talked about severe, unusual headaches, the kind that strike like lightning and warn of bleeding in the brain. But sometimes, stroke doesn't come with pain at all. Instead, it steals something far more subtle and far more frightening: your ability to understand the world around you. Let's take the story of Arthur, a 79-year-old Navy veteran from Virginia. One Sunday morning, his daughter came by to help him set up his new TV remote. Normally sharp and quick with instructions, Arthur suddenly seemed lost. When she said, "Dad, press the green button," he just stared blankly. Then he picked up the remote upside down and tried to change the channel. A few minutes later, he couldn't follow the simplest sentence. His daughter thought maybe he was tired or just having a senior moment. But within the hour, Arthur collapsed, and doctors confirmed he was in the middle of a stroke. Why this happens? When blood flow to the brain is blocked, it can affect the Wernicke's area, the part of the brain responsible for comprehension. That's why some stroke victims suddenly can't follow directions, understand questions, or even make sense of everyday language. To loved ones, it may look like confusion or stubbornness. But in reality, the brain is starved of oxygen and is struggling to process meaning. This can appear in several ways: not recognizing familiar surroundings, trouble following a conversation or simple instructions, responding with unrelated or nonsensical answers. Scientific insight. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, sudden confusion is one of the hallmark early signs of ischemic stroke. In fact, research shows that nearly 40% of stroke patients exhibit some level of disorientation or comprehension difficulty within the first hour. Why seniors? Over 70 must be extra alert. At this stage of life, memory lapses and forgetfulness are common, which makes this sign easy to dismiss. But here's the key: normal forgetfulness develops slowly over months or years. Stroke-related confusion comes suddenly, within minutes. If your loved one seems fine one moment and then suddenly cannot understand a simple instruction or familiar word, it's not just aging. It's a red flag that demands immediate medical attention. A real-life reminder. Arthur's daughter could have brushed it off as just Dad being forgetful. But she trusted her instincts, and because she acted fast, doctors were able to restore blood flow in time. Arthur needed therapy, but today, he can still enjoy long talks with his family. Without quick action, those conversations might have been lost forever. We just talked about sudden confusion, the terrifying moment when the brain can no longer process words or simple instructions. But another classic warning sign is even easier to spot, and often even more alarming: when strength suddenly disappears from one side of the body. Let me share the story of Betty, a 75-year-old grandmother from Kansas. She was carrying a basket of laundry when all at once her right arm went limp. The basket slipped from her hands and crashed to the floor. As she tried to pick it up, she realized her right leg felt weak too, as if it couldn't hold her weight. She stumbled against the wall, unable to move the way she had just moments earlier. Thankfully, her neighbor saw what happened and called 911 immediately. At the hospital, doctors confirmed Betty had suffered a stroke. Why this happens? When a stroke blocks blood flow to one side of the brain, it affects the opposite side of the body. That's because the brain's left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left. If a clot interrupts those pathways, the signal simply can't get through. The result is sudden weakness, numbness, or even paralysis on one side. It can start subtly: an arm that feels heavy or clumsy, a leg that drags slightly or trips more easily, a hand that suddenly can't grip a cup, pen, or utensil. Or it can be dramatic, as in Betty's case, when one side of the body seems to shut down without warning. Scientific insight. The American Heart Association notes that sudden weakness or numbness on one side is one of the most common and reliable early stroke symptoms present in up to 80% of cases. What makes it especially dangerous is that some seniors wait, hoping the feeling will come back, but every minute of delay means more brain cells lost. Why seniors over 70 must pay attention. It's normal for older adults to sometimes feel tired or have joint stiffness. But here's the key difference. Stroke-related weakness comes on instantly. It's not about sore muscles after gardening or arthritis flaring up. It's the sudden loss of control, the inability to hold or lift, the strange numbness that wasn't there a moment ago. A real-life reminder. Because Betty's neighbor recognized what was happening and called for help immediately, doctors were able to give her clot-busting medication within the critical window. After weeks of rehab, Betty regained much of her strength. Without that quick action, she might have been permanently paralyzed on her right side. We just talked about sudden weakness or numbness on one side of the body, the way strength can slip away in an instant. But sometimes, a stroke shows itself not through weakness in one arm or leg, but through a frightening loss of balance and coordination. Take the story of George, a 77-year-old retired postman from Minnesota. He was walking out to check his mailbox when all of a sudden, his legs felt unsteady. He swayed to the left, then stumbled forward as if the ground itself had shifted beneath him. His wife, watching from the porch, thought he might be dizzy from standing up too fast. But when he tried to take another step, his body lurched awkwardly, and he nearly fell onto the driveway. Within minutes, George was in an ambulance, and doctors confirmed he was having a stroke. Why this happens? Balance and coordination are controlled by the cerebellum and brainstem. When a stroke blocks blood flow to these areas, the brain loses its ability to coordinate movement. That's why someone who was walking steadily a moment ago suddenly staggers, wobbles, or even collapses. It can show up in different ways. Walking unsteadily, as if drunk or overly tired. Sudden clumsiness, like knocking things over or misjudging distance. Difficulty standing up straight, even when holding on to something for support. Scientific insight. According to the National Stroke Association, about 40% of strokes involve balance or coordination problems, especially those affecting the cerebellum. These are often mistaken for vertigo, inner ear problems, or just getting older. But the sudden onset is what makes it different. It happens within seconds, not gradually. Why seniors? Over 70 should be extra careful. Falls are already one of the biggest dangers for older adults. In fact, every 11 seconds in the U.S., a senior is treated in the ER for a fall. But when that fall is triggered by a stroke, the consequences are far more severe, not only from the fall itself, but from the brain damage already underway. That's why it's critical not to dismiss sudden imbalance as clumsiness or fatigue. A real-life reminder. Because George's wife acted quickly, calling 911 instead of helping him just sit down and rest, he received treatment in time. Today, after rehab, he's back to walking his neighborhood steadily and confidently. But if she had ignored the signs, he might have lost that independence forever. We just talked about how a stroke can suddenly throw off your balance, making it hard to stand or walk steadily. But sometimes, instead of affecting your whole body, the warning shows up in something as small and simple as your hands. Let's look at Mary, a 73-year-old grandmother from Georgia. One afternoon, she was pouring herself a cup of tea. But as she reached for the kettle, her fingers didn't seem to cooperate. She fumbled, nearly dropped it, and when she tried to pick up her teacup, it slipped right out of her hand and shattered on the floor. Mary laughed nervously, thinking she was just clumsy. But later that same day, she struggled to button her blouse. Her fingers wouldn't obey. When her daughter noticed and rushed her to the ER, doctors confirmed Mary was having a stroke. Why this happens? The brain controls not only strength, but also fine motor skills, the small, precise movements of the hands and fingers. When a stroke blocks blood flow to areas that handle coordination, it can cause sudden clumsiness, dropping items without reason, weak grip, struggling to hold utensils, cups, or pens, difficulty with everyday tasks like writing, dressing, or turning a key. It's not the same as arthritis or stiff joints. Stroke-related hand problems come suddenly, in seconds or minutes. Scientific Insight research published in the Journal of Neurology found that up to 60% of stroke patients experience hand weakness or impaired dexterity as an early symptom. What makes it dangerous is that people often ignore it, blaming age, fatigue, or arthritis flare-ups. But the sudden onset is the key difference. It's not gradual, it's immediate. Why seniors? Over 70 need to notice this sign. At this age, many seniors already have conditions like arthritis or tremors. That makes it easy to dismiss dropping a cup or struggling with buttons as just part of getting older. But the truth is, if it happens suddenly and out of nowhere, it could be your brain crying out for help. A real-life reminder. Because Mary's daughter recognized that something was wrong, this wasn't just clumsiness, she got her mother to the hospital in time. After treatment and rehab, Mary regained most of her hand strength. Today, she still enjoys her tea every afternoon, but with a grateful heart that the warning sign wasn't ignored. We just talked about how a stroke can suddenly affect your hands, making you clumsy with simple tasks like holding a cup or buttoning a shirt. But sometimes, the warning doesn't come through your arms or legs at all. Instead, it arrives in your stomach, and in the way the world around you suddenly feels unstable. Let's take the story of Evelyn, a 74-year-old retired nurse from Arizona. One morning, she got up from bed feeling fine. But within minutes, the room began to spin violently. She grew nauseous and ran to the bathroom, thinking she must have eaten something bad the night before. But she hadn't. Within moments, she was vomiting, her balance collapsing with every step. Her husband thought it was a stomach flu until she started slurring her words. At the ER, doctors confirmed Evelyn was having a stroke in the back of her brain, affecting her balance and coordination centers. Why this happens: strokes that affect the cerebellum or brainstem often cause sudden dizziness, nausea, and vomiting. These regions control balance and communication between the brain and body. When blood flow is disrupted, the brain misinterprets signals, making the world feel like it's spinning, vertigo. The body reacts with nausea and vomiting, even when the stomach is perfectly healthy. Balance is compromised, often leading to stumbling or collapsing. Scientific Insight. According to the American Stroke Association, posterior circulation strokes, strokes in the back of the brain, account for about 20% of all strokes and often present first with dizziness, nausea, or vomiting. Studies show that seniors experiencing these symptoms are sometimes misdiagnosed with inner ear problems or stomach flu, delaying critical treatment. Why seniors? Over 70 must pay attention. At this age, dizziness is common, caused by blood pressure changes, medications, or ear issues. That's what makes this stroke symptom so tricky. But the difference lies in how suddenly and severely it begins. One moment you feel fine, the next you're nauseous, vomiting, and unable to stand. A real-life reminder. Evelyn's husband almost waited, thinking it was food poisoning. But because he noticed the speech changes and called 911, she got emergency treatment in time. Today, after therapy, she's back to enjoying her garden, steadier than ever. We just talked about how a stroke can suddenly make the room spin, bringing nausea and vomiting out of nowhere. But sometimes, instead of dizziness, the warning comes in a quieter way. through a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion that feels impossible to shake. Meet Carol, a 76-year-old grandmother from Michigan. She had always been active, walking her dog every morning and tending her flower beds in the afternoon. But one Tuesday, while folding laundry, she felt a crushing wave of fatigue hit her. It wasn't the usual tiredness after a busy day. This was different. Her arms felt heavy, her legs weak, and all she wanted to do was lie down. When her daughter called to check in, Carol could barely keep her eyes open during the conversation. Later that evening, her speech slurred, and her family rushed her to the hospital, where doctors confirmed she was in the early stages of a stroke. Why this happens? When the brain is deprived of oxygen during a stroke, the body often reacts by shutting down energy to conserve resources. That can feel like sudden exhaustion, even after little activity. Unusual sleepiness, falling asleep during normal daily tasks. A heaviness in the limbs, making it hard to move. This is not the same as the normal tiredness seniors feel after a long day. Stroke-related fatigue strikes abruptly, without warning, and is often accompanied by other subtle signs, like slurred speech, vision problems, or confusion. Scientific Insight research published in the Journal of Stroke and Cerebrovascular Diseases found that over 50% of stroke patients reported extreme fatigue as an early symptom, often dismissed as just aging or overexertion. For seniors, this misinterpretation delays care, costing precious treatment time. Why seniors? Over 70 should be alert. Fatigue is common at this age. But here's the key difference. Normal tiredness improves with rest. Stroke-related fatigue does not. If you suddenly feel drained in a way that's unusual for you, especially if it comes with weakness, slurred speech, or dizziness, don't ignore it. A real-life reminder. Carol's family knew something was wrong when she described feeling heavier than ever after doing almost nothing. Because they acted quickly, she received treatment and recovered with only mild weakness. Without that action, she might have faced permanent disability. We just talked about how extreme, unexplained fatigue can be an early stroke warning, when your energy suddenly vanishes without reason. But sometimes the body goes one step further. Instead of just feeling tired, a stroke can cause sudden drowsiness, confusion, or even loss of consciousness. Take the story of Robert, a 78-year-old retired mechanic from Illinois. One afternoon, while playing cards with his friends, he began nodding off at the table. His buddies laughed, teasing him about falling asleep mid-game. But Robert hadn't been up late, and he wasn't tired when he arrived. Within minutes, his head dropped forward, and he became unresponsive. His friends called 911 immediately. Doctors later explained that Robert had experienced a stroke affecting the brainstem, the part of the brain that controls alertness and vital functions. Why this happens? The brainstem acts like the body's control tower. When a stroke cuts off blood flow here, it disrupts signals that keep us awake and alert. The result can be excessive sleepiness at unusual times, difficulty staying awake, even in the middle of activity, sudden fainting or loss of consciousness. Unlike normal drowsiness, which builds up gradually after a long day, stroke-related drowsiness appears suddenly and without cause. Scientific Insight. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, brainstem strokes often present with sudden changes in consciousness, sometimes being the very first noticeable sign. Research in Stroke Journal shows that seniors who experience abrupt drowsiness or fainting are at significantly higher risk of delayed treatment, since families often assume it's just low blood sugar or being overtired. Why seniors? Over 70 must be extra cautious. At this age, it's easy to blame sudden sleepiness on medications, warm rooms, or a heavy meal. But the key difference is the speed and severity. If alertness disappears suddenly, if someone dozes off in the middle of a conversation, or loses consciousness altogether. It's not normal aging. It's an emergency. A real-life reminder. Because Robert's friends didn't just laugh it off, but instead called 911, he was treated quickly. After recovery, he returned to his weekly card games. But without their quick thinking, he might never have woken up at all. We just talked about how a stroke can suddenly make someone unusually drowsy, or even cause them to lose consciousness. But strokes don't always look dramatic. Sometimes the warning sign is subtle, and it shows up in the way a person suddenly acts, thinks, or feels. Take the story of Linda, a 72-year-old retired librarian from Oregon. Normally, she was patient, gentle, and always had a warm smile for her grandchildren. But one evening at dinner, her daughter noticed something strange. Linda became unusually irritable, snapping at simple questions. Later that night, she seemed withdrawn, refusing to join in the family's favorite card game. By the next morning, she was deeply confused and disoriented. When her family brought her to the hospital, doctors confirmed she had suffered a mild stroke affecting the frontal lobe, the area of the brain responsible for personality, decision-making, and mood. Why this happens? The frontal lobe and limbic system play a major role in regulating emotions and behavior. When a stroke disrupts these areas, it can cause sudden irritability or aggression in someone usually calm, unusual withdrawal from family or activities, impulsive or risky behavior that's out of character, rapid mood swings from laughter to tears to anger. It may look like stress, depression, or just a bad day, but if it happens suddenly and without reason, it could be a stroke. Scientific insight studies in neuropsychiatry and clinical neurosciences show that up to 30% of stroke patients exhibit personality or behavior changes in the early stages. These changes are often overlooked because families assume it's emotional or psychological, but in reality, the brain itself is under attack. Why seniors? Over 70 should pay attention. At this age, families often attribute mood changes to aging, loneliness, or medication side effects. But here's the key difference. Normal mood changes develop gradually, while stroke-related changes appear suddenly. If your loved one seems like a completely different person overnight, don't ignore it. A real-life reminder. Because Linda's daughter recognized that her mother's behavior was not normal and took action, doctors were able to treat her stroke early. Linda later regained her gentle nature and continues to enjoy time with her family. But without that recognition, her condition could have worsened into permanent cognitive decline. We just talked about sudden personality or behavior changes, how a stroke can make someone act in ways completely out of character. But sometimes, the body sends even stranger warnings that most people would never connect to stroke at all. Two of the rarest, but most important, are persistent hiccups and seizures. Let's take the story of Margaret, a 71-year-old grandmother from Kentucky. She was enjoying an evening watching TV when she began hiccuping. At first, she laughed it off, thinking it was something she ate. But the hiccups didn't stop. They continued for hours, so strong that she couldn't sleep. By morning, she was exhausted, and her daughter noticed she seemed weak and disoriented. At the hospital, doctors discovered Margaret had suffered a stroke in the brainstem, an area that can trigger uncontrollable hiccups when blood flow is interrupted. Now let's look at another case. Frank, a 74-year-old veteran, had never experienced seizures in his life. But one afternoon, while sitting at the kitchen table, his body suddenly stiffened, and he began shaking uncontrollably. His wife panicked and called 911. Doctors later confirmed a stroke had disrupted electrical activity in Frank's brain, triggering the seizure. Why this happens? Persistent hiccups. Strokes that affect the brainstem can disrupt the nerves controlling the diaphragm, leading to relentless hiccups. Unlike normal hiccups that fade after a few minutes, these can last for hours or even days. Seizures. When a stroke damages certain parts of the brain, abnormal electrical activity can cause seizures, even in people who have never had them before. Scientific Insight research in the Journal of Stroke and Cerebrovascular Diseases shows that while persistent hiccups are rare, they can be a red flag for strokes in the brainstem, especially in older adults. According to the American Academy of Neurology, about 5 to 7% of all strokes are accompanied by seizures, often as the very first symptom. Why seniors over 70 should take this seriously. At this age, unusual symptoms are often dismissed. Hiccups are seen as harmless. Seizures are mistaken for just fainting. But when these events occur suddenly, without explanation, they may be the brain's way of signaling a life-threatening emergency. A real-life reminder. Because Margaret's daughter and Frank's wife trusted their instincts and called 911, both received treatment in time. Today, Margaret is back to gardening, and Frank continues his morning walks. Their quick action made the difference between recovery and tragedy. We've now walked through 13 early warning signs of stroke in seniors over 70. From the obvious, like a crooked smile, slurred speech, or sudden weakness, to the lesser-known signals such as extreme fatigue, personality changes, or even persistent hiccups. Each one is your body's way of raising a red flag, telling you that something is seriously wrong. Here's the truth. Stroke is not just part of aging. It's a medical emergency that can strike at any moment, but it doesn't have to steal your independence, your memory, or your future if you act fast. Think back to the stories we shared. Walter's uneven smile, Helen's garbled words, Harold's sudden vision loss. These weren't random moments. They were life-saving clues, recognized just in time. And because their families trusted their instincts and called 911, they were given another chance at life. But sadly, too many seniors don't get that chance. Why? Because the signs are ignored, dismissed as just getting older, or mistaken for something minor. And in those lost minutes, millions of brain cells die, changing lives forever. The message is simple, but urgent. Time is brain. The faster you act, the better the outcome. Recognizing just one of these 13 signs could mean the difference between recovery and lifelong disability, or even life and death. So here's my call to you. Don't ignore sudden changes in your body. Don't wait to see if it gets better. And don't be afraid to call 911. It's always better to be safe. If you or someone you love is over 70, share this video with them. Awareness is the most powerful tool we have in the fight against stroke. Now I'd like to hear from you. Have you or a family member ever experienced one of these signs? Maybe sudden dizziness, weakness, or trouble speaking? If yes, type 1 in the comments. If you want to learn more about natural ways to prevent stroke and protect your health, type Z. And before you go, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss important health tips that could save your life or the life of someone you love. Remember, caring for your health today is protecting your tomorrow. Stay informed, stay proactive, and never underestimate the power of early action.